Hi there and welcome to Plant CEO. In today's episode, I'd like to welcome Bjoern Witte, the CEO of Blue Horizon, and Malte Clausen, the partner and associate director at Boston Consulting Group. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Good,
Pretty
thank
good.
you.
Great to be on the show, Anna. Thank you for inviting me.
And Bjorn, you're currently in Zurich in Switzerland where you're based.
That's correct. In beautiful Switzerland.
And Malte, you're just outside Copenhagen in Denmark, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. Sunny day in Copenhagen.
Great. So, together, both your companies have launched a report called the Untapped Climate Opportunity in Alternative Proteins. Bjorn, what are the top three highlights that you would like the general public to know about?
I think the top highlight is actually the title of the study. It's the Untapped Climate Opportunity of Alternative Proteins. But to drill one level down, I think from an investor perspective, there is no other field where you can have so much impact created to be investing in than in our space. So the first big highlight is we have actually drilled down and found the first time some numbers to show the impact of capital employed versus other industries like cement and others. It's much higher if you invest that capital employed into our industry. That's the first highlight from an investor side. On the other side, number two is from a consumer perspective. We looked into first time global over 3,700 consumers and found out that what are the main prohibitors to be accelerating into this industry a bit more, or what are the big things on the heads of the consumer. And health actually is one of the big ones. So we found that we believe that a lot of people are very much aware of the health, and health in food is one of the main drivers in the future for our industry also. And I think last but not least, from a consumer perspective, more people would go animal-based free or plant-based or alternative proteins if they would get a little bit more insights on the real impact of that food. So I think the three highlights are ultimately the impact on capital employed, and from a consumer perspective, really the health issue and the sustainability issue.
Yeah, one of the things I found really interesting in the report was when you compared the investments and savings into emissions when moving towards plant-based proteins and comparing it to other things like cement and iron and steel. I think it's really important that other investors know about that too.
Absolutely, and the numbers are mind-blowing. It's like 3x, three times more impact of investing in our space compared to cement.
Yes, that's insane. And Malte, in an interview with The Guardian, you said that a move towards plant-based proteins could help alleviate the food crisis that we're currently in by cutting out the middleman. Can you explain that idea further?
Yes, definitely. So the point here is that in the animal-based food systems, there's a lot of input required in terms of crops just to feed the animals. So the conversion, you could say, is quite inefficient. You have to, even for chicken, which is generally considered one of the more efficient ways of converting crops to an end product, you need at least four to seven times the amount of input in order to have the final chicken product, compared to if you just take direct to consumer using the crop directly for human consumption. So it's just this, like I said in that Guardian article, it's just the simple mathematics of it. Rather than having 1:4, you have 1:1. You cut out the animal, which is the middleman, whether it's chicken or a cow or a fish or a pig or whatever it may be, and use the crops directly for human consumption. By using less crops, obviously less crops are needed, and that just puts less constraints or less strains on the overall resource requirements and the overall food system.
Yes, completely. And I guess what you're considering there is also the amount of land being used by animals grazing, plus additional land being used to grow crops in order to feed them. So in other ways, if that land was freed up, we could alleviate this food crisis.
That's a great point, and that's actually a very important nuance to capture as well when we talk about the land required. For the animal-based food system, it's and the deforestation that is associated with it. It's actually two aspects, right? It's cutting down trees to have area for those animals to graze, And then it's similarly an area that is required to grow the crops for those animals. So you need so you have both of these strains on the system that are then reduced by moving to a plant-based or an alternative protein system.
And on the health side, people definitely want to change for their health and the taste, but currently the report suggests that health and nutrition are the main inhibitors to a greater consumption. What specific work still needs to be done to remove those barriers, would you say?
Maybe I can jump in on this one. For me, a product I can buy today on the shelf, and I'm always quoting, it's an iPhone 5, right? From a consumer perspective, it's really not an iPhone 13 yet. And I know people when we have meetings where, have an iPhone 7 or 10 on, I don't know anyone with an iPhone 5. So what am I suggesting? I'm suggesting that the 4 basic principles of food need to be fulfilled until the mass adoption curve really picks up, what we've seen in other industries. So the 4 things are actually taste. Taste is number 1. So taste, otherwise people don't buy it again. The second one is, availability. So unless it's a mass market, you can't really buy it. So it will never create impact as a concept, but it must be available. But if you are in mass market, you need to play the rules of a mass market. So, you also have to speak about the price. So the price point needs to be at a level where people can afford it. And actually, that's also what the study suggests to cross that bridge. If you offer a premium price, you have to have a premium brand value proposition, which is sometimes today in some of the products not the case because of health, to go back. And the fourth one, so the first one is taste, second one is availability, mass market price, and the fourth one is actually trust. So you need to trust the product, and that will not only count for the plant-based products where we are today, but also for fermented products, hybrid products, and products we'll see in the future, which will be cell-based or a mix of a blend of thereof. So I think these are the main points which need to work, but we're in a transition. And as we speak, some of our portfolio companies, and as Blue Horizon, we've done 78 investments by now in the last 6 years. So we do see the iPhone 7s, 8, 9 coming in the lab, and they have a go-to-market route, and they're coming. And therefore, it's a very exciting time to be investing in this space and following, supporting these companies, because we strongly believe that this transition will help the health issue also. And we do see a lot of products with clean label, with a lot of focus in the R&D and new product development following that path of cleaner products. As I said, there's no silver bullet. You can't have everything clean, then you should probably eat just a vegetable. But if you want to follow the rules of the mass market, be in the categories have been developed over the last 30 years, you have to open the thinking and say, okay, iPhone 5 or iPhone 13, 14, maybe next week, and it's getting there.
Yep, and one of the things that you mentioned there was about trust. And do you think we need to do a better job as an industry when talking to end consumers, especially from a marketing perspective? For example, the new CEO of Impossible Foods has actually said they could have done a lot better job at that communication with their consumers.
Absolutely. I think that's a big education. And I think I seldomly speak about disruption. I think it's really a transition. So we need to embrace the existing companies, so also the big food corporates. They need to take their share of category marketing and managing there. But I think ultimately it boils down to say, if we brand a product, and today there's no brand in real meat globally, doesn't exist, right? But if we want to brand and take the opportunity to actually deliver a brand promise to consumers on a branded product, which resembles an animal-based protein, I think we need to be very careful in establishing that, and be very careful not to in the very beginning. And we believe we're just in the very beginning of that transition. We need to bring these portfolio companies, but also the whole industry needs to be very careful how to label. Where is it really, irritating consumers? Where is the protein level? I think especially in the US, there's been quite some discussion around that. How do you declare certain things? But ultimately, I think on the other side, we need to be careful also not to exaggerate, because if people come to me and say, yeah, and and there's a long ingredient list and it's not healthy and the trust is not there, we thought we eat something very healthy. I always say, take a piece of chicken and think how much antibiotics and growth hormones went into that chicken, and then you compare that to a plant-based chicken, which is, by the way, today a good alternative, at least according to a lot of the big fast food chains who move into that direction. For various reasons we probably will talk about a bit later. But I think that's sometimes misunderstood, that an ingredient list actually is something that you don't have on a piece of meat, which you probably should have.
Yes, that's a very good point. And in a way, maybe those comparisons, especially on the health side, need to be made between, plant-based proteins and meat. Especially with the ingredients and things like antibiotics that are in there. I know some of those things have actually been highlighted in different documentaries, but I think we need to do a better job at that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So thinking about the capital invested in alternative proteins, it's been rising at an annual rate of 124% in a 2-year period. That's from 1 billion in 2019 to 5 billion in 2001, and that's according to the Good Food Institute. What are your projections for this year, considering the slowdown in investments and also the decline in stock price for companies like Bjoern Witte? What are your views on that?
I think what we see is that there has been a tremendous growth in investing. It is a transformation. If you take other industries like electric or vehicles or electric mobility, and you look at their curves, and there were some setbacks, but our industry is always 8 years behind that. If you take average deal size and amounts of invested capital, so if there definitely will be a bump, I think that's clear. But it also depends on what you really bring into the sum of that number. We believe we're just in the beginning, and we'll see a big increase of investments in the space for various reasons. Impact, as we just described, there's a big impact mandate for a lot of also public institutions to be moving into a space where you want to create impact. And as we've just shown with our study with BCG, that this is the best place to put your money for that. But I think ultimately we are at a 2% penetration of alternative proteins to total volume of proteins. And we expect that, and actually in last year's study, we looked at that the first time, and this year we reconfirmed that number from a different angle, more from the consumer side, that we believe that this penetration rate will go up to between 11 and 22% over the next 10 years, which is a 10x growth, which is amazing. And this will require a lot of capital. And the capital required will not only go into tech, but also into infrastructure, which is one of the biggest, I would say, roadblocks. We get a couple of thousand of inbound decks yearly, especially in the earlier stage, from the industry to be looking at. And if you put all of that next to each other, you just say, where's the infrastructure to scale up? And I think scale up is the big thing, and scale up requires capital. And despite the opportunities we have with using existing infrastructure, which has been built, I would say fermentation tanks potentially, and in other industries, but in the food industry or other industries, I think this will require a lot of capital. The check sizes are increasingly going up. We only seeing one of the two companies which are public, which is Bjoern Witte. I think they have their own story, and I don't want to compare that to tech stocks who have suffered the same
as
way.
well.
Yeah. But I think the n equals 1. Okay, Oatly n equals 2, but it's a different category. So I think the underlying message we have, it's a fantastic time to invest as investors right now. We see a great pipeline of opportunities for the scale up, and we believe there's a massive opportunity, and we do see more and more capital going into the space.
There's been a general slowdown in the investment market here during this year, but actually less so for alternative proteins. So when you compare the slowdown overall when you compare that at a sector level, there's actually been less of a slowdown in alternative proteins. So in relative terms, you could say that that sector has actually been strengthened during 2022, at least so far. So that's just a nuance that's also important to keep in mind.
So are we likely to dramatically increase the amount invested if you're comparing it was 5 billion in 2021?
I believe so. Maybe not, you don't frame it on this 12 months, but ultimately we are at the brink of having more and more money flowing into the space. Imagine, everything we've seen in sustainable energy. Once we have future guaranteed cash flows in our industry, there will be a massive amount of influx of capital, which will be invested in infrastructure and supporting our industry to grow.
And on the actual report, what have the investor community been talking about in terms of the findings in the report?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to that. Obviously, part of our role in my job as in BCG is to advise corporations and investment firms on investment strategy. So I've met with a number of investment firms, discussed the report, and overall, there's just great interest in this topic. We did a report last year as well with Blue Horizon, obviously, the first edition of the Food for Thought report back in the spring of 2021. And both last year and this year, this is one of the most downloaded reports that we do. So there's great interest in this. At the same time, there's also still a bit of surprise, especially on the impact of capital employed that Bjoern mentioned, that this is such a great opportunity for decarbonization. So in my experience, it's a combination of interest. It's a hot topic, obviously. Lots of people, including the investment community, is very interested in this topic, combined with still a bit of surprise that this is such a great opportunity from a climate perspective. And here, of course, we need to continue to explain what we discussed earlier with deforestation, the specific composition of greenhouse gases. It's not just CO2, it's also nitrous oxide, it's methane, and it's these very potent greenhouse gases that have an outsized effect. So all of this together, of course, we need to continue to explain to the investment community, but in general, interest and curiosity to learn more.
What can we do to move the needle, especially with the big funds? And if you think about the big funds being the government pension funds or private pension funds that are investing more with public markets and are quite traditional in their approach, where we want them to invest into plant-based proteins, especially when it requires a lot more capital. If you're looking at fermentation tanks and what Bjoern was saying there about cell-based proteins and the research that we need to do there, etc.
Yes, of course. We will always start with looking at the individual pension fund and look at what is their investment strategy, and of course they need to achieve both a specific level of financial returns, in addition to contribute to the green transition or the decarbonization of the economy. And then what those investments, what are the right investment to achieve that, will be a combination of various assets. And alternative proteins can definitely be a big part of that story. So that would be the starting point. And then you would look at how can you achieve that. Of course, investment funds, I don't see any limitations why they wouldn't be able to invest in alternative protein investment funds, like for example those of Blue Horizon or any of the other players in this space. That would be, in my view, pretty straightforward. But of course, it has to fit with the overall investment strategy of that pension fund and what they're trying to achieve. So that's how we would approach that.
Maybe I just add to that. I think what's interesting right now is the change of the risk profile. I mean, anyway, it's all risks are changing globally, and with the energy crisis, the water crisis, there's a lot of pressure on the food system. And what we are seeing is in our deal pipelines, especially in the growth strategy, that actually that's increasing, and there's a couple of billion of growth opportunities with a very different risk profile, because the industry is maturing. There are companies who have a very, I would say not zero, but limited or more limited tech risk, and are not exposed to the brand risk right now in these changing consumer behaviors. So what I'm saying, there's an opportunity in the B2B space when you look at the full value chain of food. When you start on AgTech, you do a biological crop protection, you do precision fermentation for ingredients, or you just solve new things with gene editing, where you have big topics which you solve, and suddenly you have companies who have done their homework, who have had their history and real numbers, and then suddenly you're able to invest into them and pick them and put them together in a way that you have a very matching risk profile to some of the institutional investors. And I don't think that would have been the case 3 or 5 years ago, but right now it's happening, and we see that. And I think for investing, it's a great time to invest in this vintage, because it's just a great opportunity if you know where to invest.
Yeah. So do you think investors will be investing more into companies that have got some ability to protect their R&D, IP that they've invested in, versus companies that are purely more on the brand play?
For us as Blue Horizon, we look more and more upstream. The chance of getting the single brand which will make it, if you look into the US, for instance, there are over 220 brands in chicken nuggets, plant-based. So I think there will be a consolidation for good reasons. And I think especially focusing on the B2B upstream, or a strong tech stack angle in the companies along the full value chain, so it's still a very, very big market, is a prime focus of us. Looking in the space, and together with the Boston Consulting Group over the last years, nearly now, we've developed this quantified market model where we really look at the full value chain. We look at the key technologies and say, what are the main drivers of cost? When do we believe, under which assumption, which technology will impact certain costs and profit pools, and where is that shifting and why? And it's very clear for us that it's a very interesting space to be looking into, the B2B space.
Yep. And one of the other things that was highlighted in a report was trying to get consumers to even switch away from eggs was a challenge. With now there's so many alternatives in the market globally, what still needs to be done, and when are we likely to reach a price parity?
I could probably speak the full podcast only about egg and plant-based. Really look into that. I think there's a couple of aspects to egg in principle. Egg is considered a clean protein from a consumer perspective. It comes in a shell, and people really like that as the real egg. It's difficult to from a cost perspective, on the cost curves, whatever you do outside, to get to the same cost level for a final product. And it is not an easy product as a consumer to be replacing, because it's not a hero product. What I mean by that, if you go to a fast food chain and you buy a Whopper with a certain brand name in there, then the patty is the hero. But nobody would pay a premium if you add a plant-based egg. So you pay that for the burger patty. So per se, it's a difficult category in certain elements. However, egg also comes not only as a table egg or a final product, it comes also as an ingredient. And that world is different, because ultimately there's certain functionalities tied to an egg, which today can be replaced with plant-based or fermented proteins. And I think there will be a clear drive into, again, scale up and certain solutions where you do have opportunities to replace those eggs as an ingredient at the right price point.
Yeah.
So it's not as clear as with other protein replacements, I would say, on the egg space, but I'm very optimistic that it will play a big role. And it's also, by the way, very impactful. People always think it's only the coal of meat is beef, the red meat. It's so bad, and it's very bad in terms of impact. So people focus on that, but it's also it's also the sum of the amounts, the sheer amounts, which make a difference. And eggs, as we've shown in another report, has also a very bad impact on the planet in terms of water usage, greenhouse gas emissions, if you calculate that through. So there is a big impact, and there's no alternative to alternative proteins, because ultimately, looking at even Switzerland, where I sit, if we were to become 10 billion people one day and everybody ate like the Swiss, we would still need 3 planets to produce that food in today's setup. And as the Americans would probably need 5 planets for that. So I'm saying, let's look at the whole thing, but let's prioritize. And I think egg would probably not be number 1 today, but there are good alternatives. And it all boils down to, as a consumer, to the taste. And if the taste is not there, the trust is not there, the brand is not there, to have a clean protein as a replacement egg, I think it will be not as evident as like we've seen with burgers or with chicken replacements.
And do you think consumers are actually looking to have an alternative egg with a shell?
Sort of. It's like, my 4 and 5-year-old daughters, when they sit down and they eat in Swiss they say poulet, right? A chicken. And it's plant-based, and they already talk about this category as if they would have learned it for 30 years. So it's the behavioral change of consumers is the most difficult one, also especially in eating. It's an emotional thing. So if you used to have the shell and you want to crack it open, this gives you the feeling of it being very clean and protected. I think that's a big thing, but I don't think we have to replicate everything to go back. And I don't want to have a T-bone steak and put the T in there on a meat replacement. We don't need that. And the same thing, maybe we don't need it for an egg, but then we need to be very in differentiating on the markets of eggs. It's not egg is quite big as a market, very different consumer behaviors. Is it scrambled? Is it more on the breakfast menu? Is it as a bakery ingredient? So it's very different applications. But I think ultimately we will see great products with great functionalities being very clean and healthy, as we already see in the market, but also there we're not yet at an iPhone 12.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Malte, let's move to government policies. The UN has projected that 55 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions will be released in 2030 without any government changes to their policies, whereas alternative proteins have the potential to eliminate up to 6.1 gigatons of emissions. That's a huge amount, but it's also a huge amount of money that can be saved. Can you talk a little bit about that saving?
Yeah, sure. So obviously we all know that food and agriculture is one of the larger sectors, almost matching the energy sector when it comes to emissions. So I think everyone recognizes there is great opportunity here, or a very important challenge, however you want to see it, in reducing the emissions of the agricultural sector. And there are different ways of doing that, but what we would say actually is that the alternative protein opportunity is just the most straightforward. There's also regenerative agriculture and other agricultural practices that you can apply and that you should apply. But compared to the investment opportunity and the maturity of the alternative protein industry, it's actually just a matter of governments doing more to support that industry. If they want to reach the targets that are set out in the Paris Agreement, there are many ways government can support that. And we wrote about this in the report as well. So just to name a few that would be economically beneficial. One is to realign subsidies. The animal-based system is already getting a lot of government subsidies, and that is actually detrimental to the Paris Agreement. So just shifting subsidies more towards plant-based alternative protein would be one obvious thing to do. Then there's the whole area of procurement within the public sector. The public sector is a big purchaser of animal-based products. both in the educational space, like schools and high schools, universities, etc., and in the healthcare industry. Huge, thousands and thousands of meals being served every day, and that would be a very natural step for governments to just shift the consumption and the spend more towards alternative proteins. The example we just talked about with the eggs is a good example of that, right? Because it's also a way to normalize these products. For many consumers, it's still very foreign to think about, plant-based chicken or plant-based egg. Like what exactly is it? Is it processed? Is it not processed? All of these questions. So just by meeting them every day in the canteen will mean that you have much more familiarity and becomes normalized. So those are some of the examples where governments could easily move the needle. And then the final point I would mention is just in terms of labeling and how do you name these products, how do we label these products. We also see a lot of differentiation in terms of how governments are dealing with that all over the world, and where some governments are doing a great job in making it easier for plant-based and alternative protein companies to market their products. Other governments are putting more constraints, and that will have a big effect as well on the viability and the commercial success of the companies within that space. So those are some of the things we highlight in the report that are pretty much just something that governments can do. And it's very important here to also mention that the products are in the market. Like sometimes when we talk about alternative protein and what can we do about agriculture, we talk about agriculture as being a hard to abate sector, which it may be in one sense, but at the same time, we would say, well, actually, the products are mature now. They are in the market. They are being consumed every day. Unlike some of these other investments that are required in cement and steel and some of these other sectors, there's still a lot of technological development required. And of course, that's also the case for alternative proteins. Their products need to get better, but they are actually in the market right now, and you can just purchase them as a consumer, and you can support it from a government perspective. So that would be to sum up on the how governments should look at this if they want to reach the Paris Agreement.
Yep. So we should definitely all be supporting those alternative products. And when you're thinking about, especially the point around subsidies, which country is really leading the way on that?
In the report, what we did is we mapped out what are the most recent regulatory changes. And of course, there are examples like, for example, Singapore has approved cell-based meat quite famously. And Israel is working on that. I heard one of your most recent interviews with the TFI in Israel, what's happening on that front. So there are definitely certain countries that are moving faster than others. In some cases out of necessity, because they are smaller countries and they have a need to be more self-sufficient, and they don't have a lot of agricultural land, so they are more innovative in that sense. And then there are other countries that are taking it a little bit slower, but overall the trend is only moving in the direction of the long-term trend is moving in the direction of shifting more and more towards alternative proteins. And then, there will be fluctuations at a country level, but that's the overall trend. And we try to highlight in the report some of the most famous examples and what will shape the industry. Of course, what happened in Singapore, also what happened recently in China with the announcement and the inclusion in the 5-year plans. These are some of the highlights that we bring out in the report as potentially being industry shaping.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And if you think about the countries that are making slower progress, for example, Henry Dimbleby, who's the co-founder of Leon Restaurants and the Sustainable Restaurant Association, was commissioned by the UK government, and his findings was that the UK needs to reduce their meat intake by 30% over the next 10 years. And Greenpeace, for example, would have a bigger number, saying 70%. So there's a lot more to be done.
Yeah, there's lots to do, and of course governments have a huge role to play in that. And I think it's all of the stakeholders coming together: governments, investors, consumers, all of these startups, all of the players need to work in alignment to move the sector forward. So that's what we need to see.
Mm-hmm. And Bjoern, you were quoted in the Veg Economist that there's at least 295 billion market cap at risk among public food companies who lag behind this protein transformation. So it's a great opportunity for new or existing companies to transform. Who are some of those biggest public food companies that you were referencing to?
So that was a different study we actually did in partnership with MSCI last year as Blue Horizon. And what we did, we took our data and combined it with the idea of looking into the different risk profiles along the value chain and from the climate change and what's the role of the protein transformation in the net zero economy. So we looked at 485 companies, and I think 46% of them were actually exposed to alternative proteins already. So 225 out of these 400, over 400 companies. And of course, there were globally listed companies. Our challenge is in our industry that besides Beyond Meat and Oatly, there are no big companies which are actually listed, which are pure play in our industry. So we had to look, and that's actually why we did it. We also to influence policymakers and to help corporates to go in the right direction. We said, okay, if you don't disclose, and there's no real standard today, if you don't disclose the numbers of alternative proteins, what you do there, how transparent are you in your activities? Actually, just from the supply chain risk, there's a big, big risk of over 295 billion in market cap for these companies. So I won't be picking out single companies on that, but out of was a sufficiently big number of companies globally we looked at who were listed and who were active in the food space. We tried to take these who are actually also active in alternative proteins and those who are not, but relevant are on a trajectory to go there. And the key message is, do it and speak about it, but speak transparently about it. And maybe there also the regulators should be asking for more transparency, what people do. And ultimately the investors will love it because hedging that risk is a good thing.
Yeah. And would you like to give an update on the progress being made by your portfolio companies at Blue Horizon?
I don't want to go into specific companies. I just, along the lines, I'll focus on the growth strategy for now. And, we've done 78 investments in the space along the full value chain. But what I'm really happy about is that what Malte said, these products are in the market. There are companies with real products in the market, and they have a huge impact on our ecosystem. They're potentially very, very good investments. And let me start in the beginning of the value chain. If you have a biological crop protection business where you literally, through precision fermentation, teach the bug to eat the fungus, and you do it in a way that it's scalable and what would not have been possible a few years back. But that's the only alternative to chemistry today. Either you have a chemical product which you spray in the field, you kill everything, it goes into our groundwaters, you kill biodiversity, you harm the farm workers, and it's just very, very bad, ultimately also for the end consumer. If you take a strawberry today in the US, you have so many residues of, I don't know how many, I think 8 on average of chemicals being sprayed on them. So the good news is these companies are developing fast. So what we've seen a few years back that companies were trying to do everything in the value chain. It's now the value chain is breaking up. People are specializing on certain things, and new fields come up because what has not been possible 10 years ago, which was possible 5 years ago, but economically not viable, now with the support of AI is suddenly helping. And I think another aspect, I could go on with ingredients and also for certain products which are in the market, but I think ultimately what we see in the world today, which is so much change and risk and very, very scary things happening with the war, with the energy crisis, ultimately all of this will accelerate the transition to a more sustainable food system. because the real price of water will kick in, the real price of impact will kick in step by step. The externalities are no longer that far away or hypothetical. They're real. They're becoming real, and food chains and value chains are becoming real. And we see an adoption of companies in our portfolio to these opportunities. And suddenly you do have a change that you bring food production more local or regional. You do have an opportunity to process yellow peas, maybe then also not only in the US or in other parts, and ship them around the world, process them to in China and then into 2 bags, one of being isolate, the other bag being the fibers, and you ship them back to the US and you do a burger out of it. That's not very sustainable. So suddenly what we see is opportunities with tech to be scaling up certain processes in the industry, to be looking into precision fermentation, to scale that up with existing partners, to do very specific fields, adding to the whole industry. If you have an ingredient which you suddenly are able to provide to all the industry players, let me take cheese as an example. Today vegan cheese doesn't stretch. It's not, for me as a vegan, after many years, it's still one of these things. If I eat a pizza, a nice stretching cheese would be great. So we do see a lot of companies coming up, and especially one and from our portfolio, where you have a product which you add to the cheese, and then suddenly the cheese stretches. That's fantastic.
Which company is that has created the stretchy cheese?
I'm afraid I can't tell you the name there because it's still in new product development, but you'll see it probably in the market in the next 12 to 18 months. And
okay.
Also as an ingredient to the big companies.
Oh, as an ingredient source. And if you think about where you're looking to invest in next, how is it being split between plant-based, fermentation-based, and animal cell-based proteins?
So for the growth strategy, as we clearly look into that and saying the companies must be profitable when we exit them, right? So there's a certain limit to certain technologies like the cell-based meat. It's still some time out, right? We believe that will take probably another 8 years until it's at scale, 8 to 10 years at scale at the same price point. So the focus is really along the value chain on the food production, more on the fermentation and plant-based and hybrids between those two. Then I think there's a big segment of interest for us is the whole processing, the packaging, the going the full value chain from seed genetics all the way up to innovation and the processing side. And then there's a new field coming up where you literally have the same underlying technologies and you end up in biomaterials, for instance. So you do take waste, food waste, you have a precision fermentation process on it, and suddenly you have a vegan leather replacement, which is a fantastic product with great impact and also a variety of application possibilities, which becomes scalable. So the 3 fields of the food, the core technologies, I would say for us, it's less the cultivated meat right now because of, it's take a bit more time. But on the things which exist here, the second one is really looking at the food production system in itself, from farm to processing, packaging, all the way up. And then the third field we look into is biotechnology crossover to food. And of course, we also look at food as a medicine, increasingly becoming a hot topic.
Awesome, very good. And any future plans to collaborate further with new reports and with you, Malte, especially with the awareness phase and getting government subsidies?
Yes. Well, our dialogue and collaboration with Blue Horizon obviously continues, and we are continuously exploring new topics to dig into, and we will decide, on an annual basis what to do in terms of our collaboration. But it's been amazing so far. It's a huge joy to work together with Blue Horizon. Obviously, great level of expertise and insight into the industry. So we very much appreciate and enjoy that collaboration. So we want that to continue. And and also I want to thank you, and also before we wrap up here, like the job that you're doing with really educating all of your listeners and all of us in the industry on what's happening. I think it's fantastic. So thanks also to you for giving us this opportunity and for everything you do with your podcast.
Thank you so much. And yeah, amazing report. And thank you for continuing the work in this space. It was a pleasure to have you both on. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much. It was great. Pleasure talking to you. And watch out for our new reports and insights coming out soon.
Will do. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Food powers our world, but the system is broken. We are facing a crisis. Our global population continues to grow, expected to reach 10 billion in 30 years. And we're emitting greenhouse gases at an unsustainable rate. Our global food system accounts for nearly 1/3 of all emissions, half of that due to animal agriculture. We need innovation now. At Blue Horizon, we invest in the transition to a sustainable food system, funding disruptive companies at the intersection of biology, technology, and agriculture. What makes us unique is our double positive mission to achieve top-tier financial and impact returns. We set a high standard for the investments we make, quantifying impact with our proprietary impact framework. We're not only selective about what a company does, evaluating its impact on the planet, humans, and animals, but also how a company operates, assessing its environmental, social, and governance performance. Throughout the life cycle of our investments, we monitor impact and ESG, collaborating with founders and management teams to maximize their performance across both measures. We invest only in companies whose products or services make a net positive impact, considering factors like reduction of greenhouse gases, conservation of natural resources, promoting better health, fostering biodiversity, and replacing animal agriculture. We believe lasting impact is amplified by embracing leading ESG practices. Our goal is to deliver measurable and meaningful change for generations to come. Blue Horizon, the next generation impact investor.